How to grow moss rose. Moss rose, also known as portulaca, pigweed or sun plant, can be a great addition to a garden that is often exposed to dry heat. It can also be a lovely plant to grow if you are away from home a lot, or simply forget to water your plants from time to time, as it tolerates drought well. It grows in all U.S. agricultural zones, which means it can handle pretty much any temperature. Despite the name, moss rose is not actually a rose, so keep this in mind when planning out your garden. Method 1: Growing moss rose from seed. 1. Choose the right time to sow. Sow your moss rose seeds indoors about 6 weeks before you expect the last frost in your area. If you would prefer not to grow your plants inside to begin with, wait until after the last frost has passed and then sow the seeds directly into your garden. If your area doesn't experience frost, you can sow your seeds around March. 2. Select an outdoor site with well-draining soil. The spot should get full sun throughout the day. The soil should drain well as moss roses do not enjoy soggy feet. Because moss roses prefer well-draining soil, avoid planting these plants in clay soil. 3. Avoid over-sowing the seeds. Moss rose seeds are very tiny, so take care not to over-sow them, as this will eventually crowd the plants and may cause some plants to die off. Some gardeners mix the very fine moss rose seeds with sand to make the seeds easier to sow. Sow the seeds so that they are about 8 inches apart. Cover the seeds up with about 1/8 of an inch of fine compost. 4. Water the seeds after planting using a fine watering spout. Use a fine watering spout to water your seeds. Using a fine watering spout is important because a heavy spray could wash away the seeds and young seedlings. Method 2: Growing moss rose from cuttings. 1. Take more cuttings than you expect to grow. Moss rose is very easy to root from cuttings. However, you should assume a failure rate of about 2-3, so take about 3 times more plants than you require, though you may have much better success than this. Moss roses can be grown from cuttings every year. This means that after the first time you plant moss roses, you will not have to buy these plants again. You can simply take cuttings from the plants you are already growing. 2. Prepare the cuttings and allow them to take root. Take 4 to 5 inch sections of healthy growth, strip the lower foliage, and insert about an inch of this cutting into the soil. Press the soil gently around the cutting to help your moss rose cutting grow roots, or root, more quickly. 3. Keep the cuttings well watered. If you can, root your cuttings outside, as they grow well with direct sunlight. However, if you do this, don't forget to water your cuttings regularly until they become established. Water your cuttings regularly until they take root. Once they are established, however, you can water them less. Wait until the ground around your cuttings feels dry in the top 2 inches of soil. 4. Root the cuttings in water if you can't plant them outside. You can also get cuttings to grow roots in a glass of water. Once they have grown their roots, move them to the site where you hope to grow them in your garden. Method 3: Planting store-bought moss rose. 1. Consider soil drainage. If your soil doesn't drain well, consider planting your moss roses in containers. If the soil already drains well, turn the soil over using a spade. Incorporate some sand into the soil if the soil isn't already sandy. 2. Plant the moss rose into a hole as deep as the root ball. Dig a hole in the soil that is about as deep as the root ball of your rose, and twice as wide. Place the moss rose into the hole and then fill the hole in with soil. Pat the soil down around the rose gently. Water the rose to help settle the soil around it and get rid of any air pockets in the soil. 3. Keep the moss rose well watered until it is established. After you have planted your rose, water your rose a few times a week for at least 2 weeks after planting. After 2 weeks, your plant should be established in the ground, which means you can water it less. This will be discussed more extensively in the next section. Method 4. Caring for established moss rose. 1. Water your moss rose approximately once a week. Moss roses will tolerate drought, but try to water them regularly if you can. Simply watering them once a week should be enough for the plant. Use a watering can to water the base of the plant. Try to avoid watering the foliage and flowers. Avoid using a hosepipe or sprinkler to water your rose, as these devices may damage the delicate flowers. Irrigation systems work well for moss roses as these systems water the roots of the plant, not the foliage. Do not over-water your plants, as they do not grow well in waterlogged soil. 2. Fertilize the moss rose before blooming. An all-purpose fertilizer, or one for growing tomatoes, can be applied to this type of rose before it blooms. For store-bought bedding plant, apply this fertilizer just after planting. Apply fertilizer to seed-grown plants when they grow to their full size. These plants only require a small amount of fertilizer. Too much fertilizer could keep these plants from flowering. 3. Pinch off dead flowers to encourage new growth. Try to remove dead blooms once they wither, a process called deadheading, so that the plant has the energy to produce new blooms. You can use your fingertips to pinch off dead flower heads. 4. Trim and fertilize the moss rose in mid-summer. Moss roses will keep blooming all summer and into the fall, but by the height of summer they may become a little faded. If this happens, trim the plants back by about a third of their size and give the plant a light water-soluble fertilizer such as tomato feed. 5. Keep pests under control. You may find your plants attract aphids. Control aphid attacks with an insecticide spray. You can also mix dish soap with water. Pour this mixture into a spray can and then spray it on your plants. You can also hose your plants off with a high-pressure hose, but this will usually be too strong for the delicate blooms of a moss rose. Only do this after blooming has ended. Slugs and snails may also attack young plants. Control these pests by laying down pellets. Tips. The moss rose adds a lot of color to areas where other plants would struggle as it tolerates heat and requires little water. The flowers are strongly colored in shades of yellow, white, purple, orange and red. Moss rose is a low-growing plant that usually only reaches a height of about 8 inches, 20.3 centimeters, at most. It will work as a ground cover plant but is fairly self-contained, reaching widths of about 8 inches, 20.3 centimeters, at most. These plants will cascade nicely out of containers and hanging baskets and will grow out of terracotta or clay planters that usually are too heat-absorbing for other plants if you are in a very hot climate. The plant is an annual, lives for 1 year, and begins blooming from early summer, continuing until the first frosts. Moss rose will tolerate heat, wind and drought, so is suitable for containers in exposed areas and rock gardens. It doesn't mind poor, sandy and rocky soil. Warnings. Despite the name, portulaca is not a type of rose and should not be treated as one.